Have you ever stopped and wondered where our ideas about who we are really come from? Well, today, we're diving into the work of one of the most influential and, yeah, sometimes controversial thinkers on this exact topic, Judith Butler. Her ideas have totally changed how we talk about gender and the self, but let's be real, they're also famously complex. So our job today? Let's break it all down. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll get a quick look at who Judith Butler is. Then, and this is a big one, we're going to bust a major myth about her work. After that, we'll unpack her core idea of performativity, see what that means for our whole concept of a self, and finally, we'll wrap up with why this idea is, well, so revolutionary. So let's start at the beginning. Who exactly is the philosopher at the center of all this conversation? These three words, they pretty much nail it. She is absolutely a rigorous philosopher and a groundbreaking theorist. But it's that last word, troublemaker, that really gets to the heart of her impact. Not in a bad way, but because her work is designed to trouble, to really challenge our most basic assumptions about who we are. Okay, so born in 1956, Butler is an American philosopher whose main project is basically to argue against something called essentialism. That's just a fancy word for the belief that your identity, like your gender, is some kind of fixed, natural, unchanging core deep inside you. Her 1990 book, Gender Trouble, blew up, becoming this surprise bestseller and is now considered a foundational text in queer theory, which is a whole field dedicated to questioning traditional ideas about identity. Now let's get to what might be the most crucial part of this whole explainer, the biggest misunderstanding of her work. Seriously, if you've heard of Butler, chances are you've heard this incorrect take. The most common bite-sized summary you hear is something like this. Judith Butler says gender is just a performance, right? The idea that you can just pick your gender every morning like you pick out your clothes. Exactly. This is how people often took it, that gender is this thing you can just put on or take off, like an actor on a stage choosing a role for the day. And it sounds simple, it sounds super empowering, but it's not actually what she meant. And this is the key. Butler herself has been very clear that this is a major misreading of her argument. The popular idea is a myth. So, what did she really say? This brings us to the absolute core of her theory. It's all about the difference between a performance and her key concept, performativity. It's not about one single conscious choice, it's about a constant, repetitive, and often unconscious process. Okay, getting this distinction is crucial. A performance implies there's already an actor, a you, who then consciously chooses to play a role. But performativity is totally different. It's a constrained repetition of social rules and norms that we're all born into. It's not something a pre-existing you decides to do. It's the very process that creates the you in the first place. So think less about an actor on a stage and more about how the language we speak shapes our reality, often without us even realizing it. Butler has a technical name for this process, performative iterations. It sounds a little academic, I know, but all it really means is that we are constantly repeating social norms. And these repetitions are constrained because we don't just freely invent them. They're shaped by the society we live in. To put it more simply, it's all the little things we do and say over and over and over again every single day. The way we walk, the way we talk, our gestures, all these repetitive actions are soaked in social norms, and they're what slowly build and maintain our sense of who we are. Okay, so if we aren't conscious actors just performing a role, what does that mean for our sense of self? Who is the I at the center of all this anyway? This leads to one of Butler's most powerful and kind of mind-bending statements. There is no being behind the doing. What she's suggesting is that there isn't some fixed, stable self that exists first and then decides to go out and do things in the world. This hooks into a really famous idea from philosophy: existence precedes essence. All that means, in simple terms, is that we exist first through our actions, our doing. Our essence, our sense of a stable internal self, is only formed as a result of all those actions. The doing comes before the being. We can actually break this down into 3 steps. First, society sets up all these norms and expectations for what an identity is. Then, from the moment we're born, we are sort of pushed into repeating these norms through our behavior. And finally, this is the magic trick. This constant repetition creates the effect, the illusion really, of a solid internal self that was pulling the strings the whole time. The self doesn't perform the actions. The actions produce the self. So this is a pretty powerful philosophical idea, right? But so what? Why does it actually matter in the real world? What are the consequences of seeing identity not as a thing, but as a process? The takeaway here is absolutely revolutionary. By saying identity is a process, not a fixed thing, Butler's idea completely challenges the notion that categories like masculine or feminine are just natural. And here's where the power really lies. Because we're all human. These repetitions are never perfect. There are always glitches, variations, and mistakes. And it's in those imperfections that there's room for change. New ways of being can start to emerge. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question to think about. If who we are is literally built out of repetition, what could we become, both as individuals and as a whole society, if we just started repeating things differently? That question right there is the revolutionary heart of Judith Butler's work.